Throughout history, power and wealth have often gone hand in hand. But when dictators rise to power, they take this combination to a whole new level, amassing unimaginable fortunes while ruling with an iron fist. In today's video, we dive deep into the stories of the top 10 richest dictators in history, from the lavish lifestyles they led behind closed doors to the vast sums of money they accumulated at the expense of their citizens. These figures wielded power that shaped nations and left legacies of both destruction and grandeur. But just how did they achieve such wealth? What did their regimes truly look like, and how did they meet their downfall? Get ready for a detailed look at the lives, riches, and the controversial legacies of the world's wealthiest dictators, where power, money, and legacy collide in ways that changed the world forever. 10. Slobodan Milosevic, Serbia, Yugoslavia. $10 million Slobodan Milosevic, who ruled Serbia and later the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, was responsible for one of the bloodiest periods in the Balkans during the 1990s. His leadership, beginning in the late 1980s, marked the disintegration of Yugoslavia and a series of brutal ethnic conflicts that included the wars in Bosnia, Croatia, and Kosovo. Despite the destruction of much of Yugoslavia, Milosevic's wealth was significant, estimated at $10 million. This amount is relatively modest compared to other dictators on this list, but his wealth was nonetheless a symbol of corruption and power. Milosevic amassed his fortune by exploiting his position at the helm of a state-controlled economy. Much of his wealth was likely stored in foreign accounts, and several of his cronies, including members of his family and military officials, enriched themselves through corrupt practices. Additionally, Milosevic gained control over state-owned industries, including energy sectors and telecommunications, which provided him both financial and political leverage. His government was notorious for a policy of ethnic cleansing, particularly in Bosnia and Kosovo, and the devastating wars led to widespread poverty in the region. Yet, despite the poverty faced by many in Yugoslavia, Milosevic lived a life of luxury. He traveled in private jets and stayed in opulent residences, funding his extravagant lifestyle through misappropriated state resources. Milosevic's rule eventually crumbled after his defeat in the 2000 elections and a subsequent popular uprising. After his ouster, he was arrested and sent to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague, facing charges for war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. However, his trial was never completed as he died in 2006 while in custody. Milosevic's legacy is still contentious. While some remember him as a strong figure who held Yugoslavia together for a time, his rule is primarily remembered for the horrific wars and atrocities committed during his reign. 9. Augusto Pinochet, Chile, $28 million. General Augusto Pinochet's rule in Chile from 1973 to 1990 is often remembered as a paradox of economic success coupled with gross human rights violations. Pinochet, who took power in a military coup that ousted the democratically elected socialist government of Salvador Allende, ruled Chile with absolute power for 17 years. During his regime, Pinochet amassed an estimated fortune of $28 million, though this amount is widely regarded as just a fraction of what he might have actually stolen during his time in office. Pinochet's wealth came largely from his control over the country's resources, including the nationalization of industries such as copper and a variety of other lucrative state-run enterprises. Pinochet was also involved in illegal activities that helped him and his inner circle accumulate wealth, such as embezzling from state funds and using the military's economic power to influence business dealings. The regime's backing of free market policies under the guidance of the Chicago Boys, a group of Chilean economists trained at the University of Chicago, led to significant privatization and deregulation. While this created an economic boom for some, the wealth generated largely benefited the elite, including Pinochet and his associates, while the majority of the population saw little benefit. Pinochet's rule was also characterized by extreme political repression. His regime was responsible for the deaths of thousands of political opponents, with many others being tortured or disappeared. Despite the repression, Pinochet was able to maintain strong support from key sectors of society, including the military and the business community, both of which saw significant financial benefits from his policies. This created a system in which wealth and power were tightly interwoven, with Pinochet at the center. After stepping down from the presidency in 1990, Pinochet continued to exert influence as commander-in-chief of the army until 1998. During this time, international investigations into his wealth began, with some of it traced to accounts in foreign banks. Pinochet was arrested in 1998 in London on charges of human rights violations but was never fully prosecuted. His wealth, much of it stashed abroad, became a focal point in the debates over his legacy, which remains controversial. While some in Chile credit him with modernizing the economy, others condemn him for the lasting social inequalities and human rights abuses that defined his rule. 8. Laurent Désiré Kabila, Democratic Republic of the Congo. $40 million. Laurent Désiré Kabila led the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, from 1997 until his assassination in 2001. Kabila's fortune, estimated at $30 to $40 million, was largely derived from his control over the country's vast mineral resources, which include diamonds, gold, and copper. When Kabila ousted longtime dictator Mobutu Sese Seko in 1997, he initially promised to restore stability to the country. However, his reign quickly descended into corruption and violence, and he accumulated substantial wealth through the exploitation of DRC's abundant natural resources. Kabila's DRC was plagued by political instability and violence, partly as a result of the First and Second Congo Wars. The country, rich in natural resources, became a battleground for foreign and local actors seeking control of its wealth. Kabila's government was deeply implicated in the exploitation of the country's mining industry, with several international companies benefiting from the arrangement. Through his control over the mining sector, Kabila siphoned off millions, which were hidden in foreign bank accounts, allowing him to build a personal fortune. Kabila's legacy is a complex one. While he overthrew the corrupt Mobutu regime and initially gained some international sympathy, his administration quickly became as corrupt and violent as his predecessors. His government engaged in human rights abuses, including the violent repression of political opposition and the exploitation of the country's resources. Despite his wealth, Kabila did little to improve the living conditions of the Congolese people, who remained mired in poverty throughout his time in power. In 2001, Kabila was assassinated, and his son, Joseph Kabila, succeeded him. While Joseph Kabila would continue many of the same policies, Laurent Kabila's rule is remembered for the vast fortunes he and his family accumulated through resource exploitation. His assassination led to further instability in the DRC, which remains a fragile state today, continuing to face political and economic challenges. 7. Idi Amin, Uganda, $50 million. Idi Amin ruled Uganda from 1971 to 1979 with a combination of brutality and eccentricity. He is one of Africa's most infamous leaders, known for his reign of terror, which included widespread political repression, mass killings, and the expulsion of Ugandan Indians. Amin's wealth, estimated at $50 million, was accumulated through a combination of looting, the expropriation of properties, and personal enrichment during his time as president. Amin's regime was marked by extreme instability and a volatile economic situation. He seized businesses, including those owned by the Indian population, and placed them under state control, effectively enriching himself and his inner circle. His wealth was used to fund lavish lifestyles, including a fleet of luxury cars, multiple wives, and extravagant personal indulgences. Despite ruling over a poor and war-torn nation, Amin enjoyed an extravagant lifestyle, including a private yacht and a collection of exotic animals. His rule was notorious for its violence, with estimates suggesting that up to 300,000 Ugandans were killed during his time in power. Amin's violent actions extended beyond Uganda, as his military intervened in neighboring countries such as Tanzania, leading to further regional instability. His mismanagement of the economy, coupled with international isolation, led to a severe deterioration in Uganda's standard of living. In 1979, Amin's regime was toppled by a Tanzanian invasion and internal dissent. Amin fled to Saudi Arabia, where he lived in exile for the remainder of his life. His death in 2003 did little to quell the deep scars he left on Uganda. Despite the significant wealth he amassed, Amin's legacy is largely defined by the suffering he caused to his people and the extreme violence he inflicted on his opponents. 6. Nicolae Ceausescu, Romania, $1 billion. Nicolae Ceausescu, the longtime communist leader of Romania, is infamous for his oppressive rule, which lasted from 1965 until his overthrow and execution in 1989. Ceausescu's wealth was staggering, estimated at $1 billion, a large sum even by modern standards. Much of this fortune was accumulated through a combination of controlling state industries, seizing resources, and exploiting Romania's socialist system for personal gain. Ceausescu's reign was marked by a combination of heavy-handed authoritarianism and extravagant displays of power. He oversaw a country that was outwardly committed to socialist principles but secretly ran a system of patronage and corruption that enriched him and his family. The wealth Ceausescu acquired was often hidden in foreign accounts and properties, and he utilized his control over state resources to fund a lavish lifestyle for himself and his family, while the Romanian people suffered under extreme poverty. His regime engaged in a variety of illegal financial activities, including siphoning off state funds and resources for personal gain. One of Ceausescu's most infamous projects was his attempt to transform Romania's capital, Bucharest, into a showcase for his power. He demolished much of the city's historic districts to make room for his grandiose People's Palace, which was one of the largest administrative buildings in the world. The construction was financed by forcing millions of Romanians to work for little to no pay, further exacerbating the country's economic hardships. This palace would become symbolic of his obsession with power and luxury at the expense of the Romanian people. Despite the financial and material wealth Ceausescu accumulated, his regime ultimately collapsed in December 1989. Widespread dissatisfaction with his brutal policies, economic mismanagement, and the cult of personality he built around himself sparked protests. After being captured and tried in a rapid trial, Ceausescu and his wife, Elena, were executed on Christmas Day 1989. Ceausescu's legacy remains controversial. While some acknowledge the industrialization he brought to Romania, the vast wealth he amassed through corruption and the repression of his people left a legacy of suffering that has not been easily forgotten. 5. Saddam Hussein, Iraq. $3 billion. Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq from 1979 to 2003, amassed a fortune estimated at $2 to $3 billion during his brutal reign. Saddam's wealth came from a combination of state resources, control over oil revenues, corruption, and ties to international business networks. As one of the world's most notorious dictators, his power and wealth were built on the back of Iraq's vast oil reserves, and he maintained an iron grip over the country's economy. Saddam's personal wealth was further augmented by illicit schemes, such as kickbacks and commissions from foreign companies that sought to do business with Iraq, particularly during the United Nations Oil for Food program, which was meant to alleviate the suffering caused by sanctions. Under Saddam's rule, Iraq was a key player in the global oil market, with Saddam using his control of Iraq's oil wealth to consolidate power, both domestically and internationally. His family and inner circle were deeply involved in enriching themselves through oil deals, and Saddam would go to great lengths to maintain control over this valuable resource. While Iraq's oil revenues allowed Saddam to finance his vast military and oppressive government, they were also used to fund extravagant personal luxuries. Saddam's wealth was secretive, hidden in offshore bank accounts, luxury estates, and foreign investments. Saddam Hussein's reign was marked by constant violence, repression, and numerous wars. His rule saw the Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988, the invasion of Kuwait, 1990, and the Gulf War, 1991, which led to devastating consequences for Iraq. While he maintained strong support from the military and loyalists, his authoritarian policies, widespread human rights violations, and the devastation caused by his wars left a deep scar on the country. Despite the wealth he amassed, Saddam's government failed to improve the standard of living for ordinary Iraqis, who suffered under sanctions, war, and oppression. In 2003, Saddam's rule came to a violent end when US forces invaded Iraq, overthrowing his regime. After hiding in a hole in the ground for several months, Saddam was captured and later tried for crimes against humanity. He was executed by hanging in December 2006. Saddam's death, while bringing a degree of closure to many, left Iraq in turmoil. His legacy is one of fear, wealth, and ruthless power, with the country still grappling with the aftermath of his oppressive rule. 4. Kim Jong-il, North Korea. $5 billion. Kim Jong-il, the leader of North Korea from 1994 until his death in 2011, was a man of great wealth and absolute power, with an estimated fortune of $4 to $5 billion. Despite leading one of the most isolated and impoverished countries in the world, Kim amassed an enormous personal fortune, largely through control over North Korea's resources, including the country's state-run businesses, its lucrative weapons programs, and illegal activities like counterfeiting and drug trafficking. His wealth was hidden in overseas bank accounts and international investments. Kim's wealth was built through his ability to manipulate the country's limited resources to benefit his regime and family. North Korea's economy was built largely around the military-first policy, Songun, where the country's resources were funneled into building military infrastructure and developing nuclear weapons. As the country's supreme leader, Kim's personal fortune was intertwined with the government's assets, and his wealth allowed him to maintain his lavish lifestyle, which included private jets, luxury yachts, and extravagant residences. Despite his enormous personal wealth, the North Korean population lived in abject poverty, with widespread hunger, repression, and lack of basic freedoms. Kim Jong-il's regime was defined by its totalitarian control over all aspects of society, including the economy, the media, and the military. His government also engaged in widespread human rights abuses, including forced labor camps and the execution of political dissidents. Kim's dynasty continued its brutal control over the country, maintaining the illusion of an invincible leader and fostering a personality cult around Kim's image. Kim Jong-il's death in 2011 marked the end of an era, but his legacy was passed down to his son, Kim Jong-un, who continues to rule North Korea. The wealth that Kim accumulated, while vast, came at the expense of his people's suffering. His leadership continues to be marked by the same levels of secrecy, oppression, and militarization that defined his rule. 3. Mobutu Sese Seko, Zaire, now DR Congo, $5 billion. Mobutu Sese Seko, the authoritarian leader of Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, ruled the country with an iron fist from 1965 to 1997. His estimated wealth of $5 billion was accumulated through an entrenched system of corruption, manipulation of state resources, and control over the nation's lucrative mining industry. Mobutu's regime was notorious for its embezzlement of public funds, siphoning off billions of dollars from the country's rich mineral resources, particularly copper, gold, and diamonds. Mobutu's wealth was also the result of his ability to control Zaire's political and economic systems, turning the country into his personal fiefdom. His fortune was built on a combination of patronage, which ensured loyalty from the military and key officials, and his manipulation of the economy for personal gain. He took full advantage of foreign aid, government contracts, and international deals, often funneling large sums of money into personal accounts and overseas investments. Mobutu's extravagant lifestyle, which included expensive homes, luxury cars, and private jets, stood in stark contrast to the widespread poverty of the Congolese population. Mobutu used his wealth and political power to cement his position as the central authority in Zaire. His regime was characterized by extreme authoritarianism, a cult of personality, and brutal repression of opposition. The country's resources were systematically looted, while the people endured extreme poverty and human rights abuses. He maintained his grip on power with the support of the military, often using force to quash any form of dissent. Mobutu's downfall came in 1997, when his government was overthrown by rebels led by Laurent Désiré Kabila, who marched into the capital, Kinshasa. Mobutu fled to Morocco, where he eventually died of prostate cancer in exile. Despite the immense wealth he amassed, Mobutu's legacy is one of corruption, mismanagement, and the devastation of Zaire, which would later be plagued by civil war and ongoing conflict. His assets, accumulated through decades of theft from the state, were widely seen as a symbol of his self-serving rule. 2. Ferdinand Marcos, Philippines, the 10th president of the Philippines, held power from 1965 to 1986. His estimated fortune of $5 to $10 billion was amassed through a combination of state corruption, embezzlement, and the exploitation of public funds. Marcos and his wife, Imelda, were infamous for their lavish lifestyle, which included massive jewelry collections, luxurious homes, and extensive international real estate holdings. Marcos's wealth came from his control over government contracts, foreign aid, and a range of corrupt business ventures, including the manipulation of the country's rich natural resources. During his time in power, Marcos declared martial law in 1972, which allowed him to rule as a dictator for nearly 2 decades. Under martial law, Marcos implemented policies that suppressed political opposition, curtailed civil liberties, and enriched himself and his allies. The Philippine military played a significant role in protecting the regime, and many of the wealthiest elites in the country were deeply tied to Marcos's rule. The dictator's personal fortune grew through the manipulation of various industries, including the sugar and tobacco industries, as well as through large-scale financial fraud and looting of public coffers. The Marcos family's ill-gotten wealth became a symbol of the abuse of power, as it was later revealed that billions of dollars had been stolen from the Filipino people. After Marcos was ousted in the People Power Revolution of 1986, investigations uncovered an astounding amount of hidden wealth, including bank accounts, foreign properties, and artwork. The Marcos family was never fully able to account for all of their stolen fortune, but estimates place it at over $10 billion. Ferdinand Marcos died in exile in Hawaii in 1989, but his legacy of corruption continues to impact the Philippines. His wife, Imelda, was famously convicted of corruption-related charges, but the wealth they amassed during their rule remains a bitter reminder of the exploitation of the Filipino people. 1. Muammar Gaddafi, Libya, $200 billion. Muammar Gaddafi, the revolutionary leader of Libya, ruled the country with absolute power for over 40 years, from 1969 until his violent death in 2011. Gaddafi's wealth was staggering, with estimates ranging from $200 billion to even higher, making him one of the wealthiest dictators in modern history. His fortune came from Libya's vast oil reserves, which he controlled with an iron grip, as well as from a combination of corruption, arms deals, and investments in various international enterprises. Gaddafi's rule was marked by extreme authoritarianism, where dissent was ruthlessly suppressed, and his wealth was often hidden in offshore accounts, luxury estates, and investments abroad. Under his leadership, Libya became one of the world's leading oil producers, and much of the country's oil wealth was funneled into Gaddafi's personal coffers. His regime also funded a number of foreign ventures and supported revolutionary movements across Africa and the Middle East, which further enhanced his influence on the global stage. Gaddafi's wealth was used to maintain his extravagant lifestyle, which included luxurious palaces, a private jet, and a fleet of expensive cars. He was known for his eccentric personality and taste for lavish displays of power, and he kept a tight grip on Libya's economy. However, while Gaddafi amassed an immense fortune, the Libyan people often suffered under his rule, which was marked by human rights abuses, suppression of political opposition, and extensive corruption. In 2011, amid the Arab Spring uprisings, protests against Gaddafi's rule broke out across Libya. The regime quickly devolved into civil war, and NATO forces intervened. Gaddafi was eventually captured by rebel forces and killed in October 2011, marking the end of his 4-decade rule. His death brought an end to one of the most repressive regimes in modern history. Despite his wealth, Gaddafi's legacy is one of brutal oppression, squandered national resources, and the destabilization of Libya, which has since struggled with ongoing conflict and lawlessness. As we conclude, we hope you gained valuable insights into the lives of these powerful figures. These dictators not only amassed extraordinary wealth but also left a complex legacy, marked by both their influence and the devastation caused by their rule. If you found this video interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our future content. Your support helps us continue bringing you in-depth historical stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.